right after watching this movie, my friend texted me asking what the plot of Predestination was, and it took me quite a while to give a very cryptic answer. Predestination is written and directed by Michael Spierig and Peter Spierig. It's based on the short story All You Zombies by Robert A. Heinlein and stars Ethan Hawke, Sarah Snook, and Noah Taylor. And Predestination is one of those movies that's very hard to explain what its plot is because of how many twists there are that are not ruined thankfully by the trailer, and I don't want to ruin them either. So the most I will say is that Predestination starts out with this temporal agent traveling back in time to a bar in the 70s to work as a bartender, and here he meets this man who begins to tell him his life story, and the bartender offers the man an opportunity to go back in time again to the 60s to right the wrongs that were inflicted upon him. And I really enjoyed watching Predestination. It has an extremely mind-bending story. It has great performances, especially from Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook, who is absolutely incredible in this movie. I have a couple of issues with it that mostly stem from I think it's a bit too short, but that's really kind of a compliment anyway, so. Predestination is a very low-budget kind of sci-fi movie, and I'm glad that the filmmakers knew this and didn't try to bite off more than they could chew and try to do any fancy tricks that they couldn't afford. So the visual effects are wisely a lot simpler and in effect a lot more believable for the audience. Like when they time travel, all that happens is that they just blip, they just disappear, and then they just kind of mess up the room a bit. I mean, it's even simpler than what we saw in Looper. The production design is also just as simple, I think, but not in a cheap way. I mean, the three time periods here, the 90s, 70s, and 60s, if I'm not mistaken, they all have like subtle period detail that still manages to separate one from the other. And I really like how the characters here don't have overly fancy technology. I think that if they tried to, make everything a lot prettier or whatever, it wouldn't be necessary, and I think it would have actually distracted from the emotional core, which is what I think is most important about Predestination's story. I mean, Ethan Hawke's character only carries around the pistol, the time travel machine itself is just like a violin case, and I really, really like that. It's really quirky and weird. And I have to say that the makeup is fantastic also. Everything from the burn effects to the aging effects to completely transforming Sarah Snook's character. I can't really say anything about her character, but she goes through a lot in this movie, and the makeup really helps sell it. And the editing by Matt Villa is surprisingly very coherent even while the story jumps around through time. You still manage to have a general sense of what's happening, what's at stake, who's who, no matter like how many things are taking place at the same time. And this is the kind of movie that if you watch it a second time, you'll notice a lot of like hidden visual clues in the editing that really kind of point to the ending and to like the various twists and turns. So it's really intelligently constructed in that regard. And acting-wise, Ethan Hawke, of course, is just inherently likable. He's always great in his roles. So you really are like on his side from the get-go. And he has like a toughness about him, but he's not like showing off about it. He's not really ripped or anything like Dwayne Johnson or Vin Diesel or something. But he really manages to portray this toughness through like his ability to really show emotion in very subtle ways. And then if you hear people talk about how Sarah Snook steals the show in this movie, she really does. I mean, like, there's no doubt about it. She, again, I can't really say much about her character, but her role is very incredibly complex, and she manages to nail every single aspect of it. It's amazing to see her turn on a dime at certain points, but the emotion she conveys is still very, very genuine. And the story in Predestination really messes with your head. It's so complicated, and you kind of have to pay attention like all the time. But for me, it's kind of okay if it might get a bit convoluted at spots, because I think it really uses time travel to tell an emotional story, which, like I said, I think is the most important thing about this movie. Both Sarah Snook's character and Ethan Hawke's character get very emotional scenes that I think are missing from a lot of sci-fi movies that really, for me, make the sci-fi a lot more accessible and believable for the audience. And as directors, the Spierig brothers maximize their limited locations by approaching scenes in different ways. Like, more than half this movie, I think, takes place in this bar, and it never really feels that boring because of how they know how to use every single inch of the place to make things, look different or whatever. And, even the sets outside the bar, like, they manage to employ like the same tactics. Like, they approach scenes just in really, really creative ways. Like I said, I do have a couple of issues with Predestination that stem from it being, I think, a bit too short. For one, like I mentioned, they spend like more than half the movie in the bar, if I'm not mistaken, and consequently, it feels like they don't spend enough time outside it. So like I said, I wasn't bored with the bar scenes, and it's all very well written. It's just that there was really a point watching the movie where I realized they're still here, and I kind of wish they would kind of move a bit faster, maybe, to allow for time outside the bar. I mean, and the other problem I have is that some character decisions I think aren't fleshed out enough. I mean, especially with Sarah Snook's character, who, like I said, goes through a lot. Sometimes I feel like the things she sees and experiences aren't, she kind of takes them in stride when I kind of would have expected her character to be a bit more shocked about what's happening. But yeah, whatever. But I still do think Predestination is a really good movie. It's the kind of movie you watch with your friends who are ready to watch this kind of thing, and then you discuss it afterwards. We spent like an hour talking about it, I think, like trying to figure out what we just watched. And it's great. It's great to see a movie like this again that has all these twists that actually do work this time and really contribute to the story and the characters. So those are my thoughts on Predestination. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.